The full 2024-25 Penn State wrestling schedule has been released. And this is a pretty exciting, entertaining slate that honestly looks a lot tougher than last season's.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And thanks so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. My name is Zach Seyko. I am the host of the show. And let me know your thoughts down in the comment section about Penn State wrestling's schedule. It has been released in full for 24 and 25. And this is my initial reaction to it, some takeaways about this. And the initial one is that when you compare this schedule to 23 and 24, it is absolutely tougher than the previous season. Now, I do want to preface, okay? I think Penn State wins all of these dual meets. I think they go undefeated. They win the Big Ten championship, the tournaments as well, the Big Ten tournament and the NCAA tournament. But it is also fair to say, it is true that when you look at 24 and 25 versus the previous season, Penn State is getting a bigger challenge for the slate. And that's good. I want them to work for everything. I don't want it to just be handed to Penn State wrestling just because they're number one year in and year out. They need to have a challenge here. So I'm going to go through some of these matchups, these dual meets that intrigue me the most. And it's fair to start with specifically the Bryce Jordan Center dual meets. And I'll get to the Beaver Stadium dual meet that is not on this schedule, and hopefully it will be in a year's time. But Penn State picked Michigan and Iowa, which is appropriate. The home dual meets, the best ones that are there. You have two of them being in the Bryce Jordan Center, and you couldn't have gone wrong there. Those two with Michigan and Iowa back to back. So it's not like they go from Rec Hall to the BJC back to Rec Hall. They're going to have the Bryce Jordan Center for 2 Fridays in a row with Michigan and Iowa. And these are the only dual meets that you could have chosen on the home slate. I expect Michigan to be ranked higher. They're a preseason number 14 according to Intermat. I think they'll be ranked higher by that time, by the time they face each other. And then Penn State versus Iowa, this is another classic 1 versus 2, again, between the Nittany Lions and the Hawkeyes. So it's fitting, but both of those matchups will be sellouts, will have the juice necessary just to remind people just how big wrestling is in Pennsylvania. Now, the other intriguing duels and matchups just from the schedule, and then I'll go through it, week by week by week with the dates to go through it in its entirety. The other intriguing duels and matchups that people should have circled on this list, the NWCA All-Star Classic, it's at Rec Hall, and it's in the middle of November to kick off the Penn State wrestling season. And there's 7 Nittany Lions that are going to be wrestling in the All-Star Classic. Then you move on to the journeyman duels, and Penn State's going to face not 1, but 2 of those top 20 opponents that I mentioned right out of the gate. Arkansas, Little Rock, and Missouri are going to face Penn State, and you could hypothetically get a rematch in December of another finals preview, Levi Haynes and Keegan O'Toole. So Penn State will also face Binghamton, but then Arkansas, Little Rock, and Missouri, all in the span of 1 day for the journeyman duels. You look at the schedule and see some of these other out-of-conference matchups. They go to Lehigh, and a top 25 matchup on the road. Again, I want to remind people that I don't think that Penn State loses any of these, and they would never lose this one to Lehigh here. But it's just an interesting matchup. Again, Lehigh's top 25 ranked by Intermat. I think of a wrestler like Orion Crookham, who's going to arguably be the favorite at 133 pounds. How does a Braden Davis handle that matchup? If he's going to bump up and be that 133-pound wrestler for Penn State, how does he handle that matchup, and where is the talent gap between a Crookham and a Davis for the first time in this upper weight class? I also think of the top 25 matchup against Wyoming. Penn State usually likes to schedule, well, what was the former Pac-12. I guess Oregon State's out there, right? Still, they stuck behind with the sinking ship. But for Penn State, they usually like to schedule an Oregon State or an Iowa State, or this time, in this case, a Wyoming, which is a top 25 team. And Jor Volk, who knocked out Braden Davis in the postseason last year at NCAAs. He's going to face a Luke Lillidahl most likely. Luke Lillidahl is the best wrestler that Penn State has at 125. It's just a matter of having that confirmation when he goes out there to wrestle the opening duel of the season against Drexel. But that's going to be a potential postseason matchup. Volk versus Lillidahl right out of the gate. And then I look at this stretch on Penn State's schedule that everybody needs to circle, because you have back-to-back-to-back-to-back weeks, or matches, I should say, where Penn State is going to be challenged. This is going to be the height of the schedule. Back-to-back road duel meets against a top 3 Nebraska team preseason, and they very well might stay there. I can't see Iowa losing before they get to Penn State, and I don't know that Nebraska does either. But I'm not a Nebraska expert here, so things can change, right? But 2 top 3 opponents in this span here. One of them is Nebraska on the road. Another one here in this back-to-back road dual meet before they get to Iowa and Michigan. You have Rutgers. So this Big Ten portion of the slate, when they get to Big Ten conference wrestling opponents, Nebraska gets a little interesting. Because if we remember from last season, Nebraska matched up pretty well with Penn State when it came to the dual meet lineup. I mean, that one was the closest of all margins. It was 22-13. Nebraska gave them a fight. It made it interesting, made it entertaining, and not every match was just a given for Penn State. There were some toss-ups in there. Nebraska is back. They're reloaded. Again, preseason top 3 according to Intermat. I like what the Cornhuskers bring to the mat this year. Rutgers, not going to be as formidable of an opponent as a Nebraska, though, but to go back-to-back on the road like that is pretty difficult for Penn State. Before you pivot, you go to the Bryce Jordan Center dual meets, and oh, look at that. You have Iowa and Michigan back-to-back as well. So that is quite the gauntlet. Penn State's number 1. They're going to stay there, but to go through, that is a wrecking ball of opponents. Nebraska, Rutgers, Iowa, and Michigan, all back-to-back-to-back-to-back in 4 dual meet spots in that middle part of the schedule. Then to finish things up, don't sleep on Ohio State. Don't sleep on this Ohio State team. They are coming in as the preseason, and I don't think a lot of people are, but I say that because I think they can finish in the top 5, maybe even in the top 3. I think this team will surprise some people. They're still extremely young, and for the most part, they are underrated. I think wrestling diehards understand how good this team can be, and when Penn State is facing them on Valentine's Day, for what it's worth, but February 14th, in 2025, as an opponent, as a neutral opponent, let's take Penn State out of the equation here for a second. I would rather face Ohio State earlier in the campaign than I would later in the campaign, because this team might peak at season's end. And that's good for Ohio State, right? That's a team that's been going through a bit of a rebuild. They have that youthful inexperience, but I think by the time they get to February and then going into March, Ohio State will surprise some people and say, oh yeah, this is a top 10 team. They're solid. No, this is a team that can finish within the top 5 and maybe challenge for that 2nd or 3rd spot in the NCAA postseason. And then you also have to finish the season, the Big Ten slate, up against on the road once again. So you have another back-to-back road matchup for the dual meets, Ohio State, and then number 12, Illinois. You compare that to 23-24, this kind of schedule was not the case for Penn State. You had Indiana, you had Michigan, Michigan State, Maryland, Ohio State, Iowa, Rutgers, Nebraska, and those were good teams that they faced, but not all in a row. There were some buffers, there were some breaks for Penn State, whereas I look at this schedule and it's like, this is entertaining. Yes, Penn State's going to win these overall, but get your popcorn ready. These are some exciting matchups, previews into what we could see in the potential postseason bouts individually when we get to that point. I am really excited for this Penn State wrestling schedule because not everything is just going to be the easiest given. Yes, Penn State will win. Penn State will win convincingly. But you can't just look past any opponent and say, oh, well, they're not going to give Penn State a fight. Certainly, there are some cases here when we go through that schedule. I'll go through the full official schedule and share what's missing from this 2024-25 schedule. That is coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all in the same page where you place your bets. So it's a convenient, simple setup, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's all it takes, $5 to get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. You just got to visit FanDuel.com. Again, that's FanDuel.com. And if you look over at FanDuel, you can see the betting lines for Penn State versus USC. Penn State is a -4.5 point favorite on the spread, -194 on the money line, and the total is moving back up to 50.5. If you like those lines, you can bet them right now at FanDuel.com. Again, that is FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And today's episode is also brought to you by Gametime. You got to download the Gametime app because buying tickets to your favorite events should not be stressful. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks, which makes it getting tickets to your favorite live events even easier than before. Gametime Picks, what does it do? It filters out all of the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands and thousands of tickets. And if you look at Gametime, let's look at some Penn State football tickets, shall we? They play at USC. If you are going to the game from Pennsylvania, safe travels. If you are a Penn State fan out in the Los Angeles area, well, they already have the tickets sorted. So I have the top deals in front of me for the Gametime Picks, and they're in section 101, row 22. You can get with all-in pricing, so there's no surprise fees at checkout, $105 per ticket. And then if you're just looking for the best price, you're looking for the lowest price. You're looking for the lowest price. Gametime shows that to section 315, row 11, all-in price, $23 per ticket. These are the kind of deals on Gametime with that all-in pricing. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms apply. Again, that code is LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Now let's talk about the schedule from a different angle and what's missing from the schedule. I think everybody knows that. I've already alluded to it. Penn State is not wrestling Oklahoma State, and they are not wrestling in Beaver Stadium. I think that's what everybody was looking forward to. Let's address the point about Oklahoma State, because the Beaver Stadium duel could have been pulled off in this cycle, I think. I also believe, I mean, there's a lot of nuances here, right? But Oklahoma State, the schedule is already in the works. Penn State finding its opponents early on, and the David Taylor Oklahoma State move didn't happen until, pretty late after the Olympic trials had concluded, right? The end of April, May, right? That time frame. And then for David Taylor to get adjusted and the schedule already in the process of being made, Penn State doesn't have all of these open slots to fill. And this is going to be a prime time kind of matchup when it comes to collegiate wrestling. So you don't just, let's just schedule Oklahoma State last second. No, there has to be this buildup. There has to be this planning. How can we maximize it? So next season, for 2025-2026, I fully anticipate that Penn State will make Oklahoma State almost that regular non-conference opponent. It makes sense. The teacher versus the student, Cale Sanderson versus David Taylor, it's too difficult to pass up. It's so easy to put on the schedule and make wrestling fans across the board, and even people that aren't exactly wrestling fans, like they appreciate Penn State wrestling or they aren't as diehard as they would describe themselves, but that would get eyeballs, and that's what would warrant a Beaver Stadium type of duel. I appreciate Carter Starachi's energy for trying to promote it, trying to push it. What complicated, because I think they could have gotten the Beaver Stadium dual meet this time around in 24-25, but they also began the plans for stadium renovations, okay? There is the complicated component to it of what happens if there's rain or snow. As you approach November in central Pennsylvania, there is a chance that, yes, you could get snow, or you could get a really cold and rainy day. I still think the wrestling fans far and wide would show out for that kind of, that would be a historic matchup that Jeff Byers, the voice of Penn State Wrestling, had talked about. We could see maybe 60,000 plus in Beaver Stadium and see a record set by the most fans in attendance for a collegiate wrestling match. That also needs some planning. So if Penn State's going to pull that off, you got to go with an Iowa, a Michigan. I think you go with Oklahoma State. I think you go with Oklahoma State. Historically, again, both Penn State and Oklahoma State historically are the best programs, and it's not to say that Iowa and Michigan aren't. I think that David Taylor element certainly adds to it. So in a year's time, as the stadium renovations progress, I think that's what really kind of took away from this, because it could have happened, it should have happened, it didn't. Too many other things, extracurricular things were going too fast, and that's why you don't have, again, David Taylor just dropped down into Stillwater, and it took some negotiating to get him there. Okay, so this wasn't quick, and Penn State's first thought wasn't, can we schedule an Oklahoma State dual meet now that somebody who's contributed to this wrestling program for the longest time has just up and left? No, there was kind of that processing period like, oh, this is real. This is real that one of Cale Sanderson's strongest proteges and someone who represented Penn State wrestling and the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club so well is not here anymore. It's understandable that Penn State didn't say, when can we get them on the schedule the next day? That's not how those conversations go. But now that the dust has kind of settled and Oklahoma State is right in the thick of it for the postseason when it comes to top 5 and who's going to finish second to Penn State, right? Oklahoma State will be an interesting opponent for years to come, and I could see that being a regular non-conference opponent. For the Beaver Stadium duel, you need that contingency plan. What happens if the weather is bad? You also got to cooperate. That's football's house. You got to cooperate with football, make sure everything's okay, and if it aligns with the schedule. Well, you know the football schedule years in advance, now that the Big Ten slate is official. So the 25 schedule for Penn State football is known. You now have more time for the planning. The stadium renovations aren't just popping up. I know that's a 3-year plan, but you at least have more of they've been working on the winterization for Beaver Stadium, right? There's all these other logistics, politics, nuances that can't just say, oh, let's put Penn State wrestling in Beaver Stadium. How come we didn't do it? There's all these other competing factors that kept it. Timing's everything. Timing is everything at the end of the day. That's what it boils down to, timing. Going back to the overall schedule, I'm going to lay it out now to finish up this reaction episode. 3 top 10 opponents for dual meets. 8 top 20 opponents for dual meets, 10 in the top 25. Like I said, comparing it to 23 and 24, this is a much more exciting schedule for Penn State wrestling. I can't wait for it. And the season begins on November 16th officially. That's a Saturday with the NWCA All-Star Classic. That's in Rec Hall. And then Penn State's going to host Drexel the next day on Sunday, November 17th. Then Penn State is back at the Army Black Knight Invitational. That's a routine thing year to year, Sunday, November 24th, beginning at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. On Sunday, December 8th, they'll travel to Lehigh and face a preseason ranked Lehigh team out in Bethlehem. On Sunday, they return home to Rec Hall against a preseason ranked Wyoming team on Sunday, December 15th. Then the Journeyman Duels down in Nashville, Tennessee, where they are going to face on Sunday, December 22nd, Binghamton, Arkansas Little Rock, which is an up-and-coming program and has really quality wrestlers, guys that will compete strongly in the postseason once again. And then Missouri, that potential Levi Haynes, Keegan O'Toole rematch, if they do in fact, that's a lot of wrestling, 3 dual meets in one day. I don't need to tell you that. Then a little bit of a break, give them a winter break there, Christmas break. Friday, January 10th, they're back in action against Michigan State at home in Rec Hall. And then here comes the gauntlets. Friday, January 17th on the road at Nebraska. That could be a potential top 3 matchup. It should be for what it's worth. On the road again, Friday, January 24th. At Rutgers. That's a top 20 team, and maybe Rutgers does move up the rankings to that point. They could prove to be a little bit better. That should just be a fun environment in Piscataway before Penn State wipes the floor with them. For the following week, Friday, January 31st, that is one of the Bryce Jordan Center duels. That is a home match against Iowa. That could be the whiteout. Maybe both of these are the whiteout, but Iowa definitely will be as that 1 versus 2 dual meet matchup. Michigan is the following Friday, February 7th in the Bryce Jordan Center again. So back-to-back Bryce Jordan Center matches. Rec Hall, Sunday, February 9th against Maryland. So Penn State gets a little bit of a break in there. Maryland's just not as competitive of a wrestling program. Back on the road 5 days later at Ohio State. That's a team that I circle and say, hey, they could be better than advertised here. Out in Columbus, Ohio, Friday, February 14th, and then on the road to finish Big Ten wrestling action at Illinois, which could prove to be another top 10 matchup if they win the appropriate dual meets. That is on Sunday, February 16th. Penn State will finish with Senior Day in Rec Hall, Friday, February 21st against American, and we've known about that one for a while. For the postseason, the Big Ten championships are Saturday, March 8th and Sunday, March 9th, and then the NCAA championships where Penn State will look to try to reset those records that they did in 2024. Thursday, March 20th, Friday, March 21st, and Saturday, March 22nd, and the championships in Pennsylvania, the Wells Fargo Center in Philadelphia. So that is the full Penn State wrestling schedule for the 2024-25 campaign. And thanks so much for joining me on this episode of Locked On Nittany Lions. Again, let me know your thoughts down in the comments section about this wrestling schedule and which matchups, which dual meets you are most excited for. Please leave a like on this episode, share it with friends and family. And if you're not already, become an everyday or subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts for the latest conversations around your favorite Penn State sports teams.